I know you've heard countless breathtaking stories, but this piece of my life is something you've certainly never heard before. I worked as a call girl in Australia and once had to entertain 6 African American men. You can't even begin to imagine the conditions under which foreign call girls live. My name is Yue Yue. I was an ordinary girl from a middle-class family in Zhejiang, China. After graduating university in 2019, I found a job in a public institution. If life had continued on this path, my existence would have been a routine 9-to-5 job. Ordinary, but comfortable. Even though it wouldn't have made me wealthy, it would have at least spared me from becoming a call girl. In 2012, due to my friend's influence, I became addicted to drugs and was drawn into the world of underground gambling. 6 months later, I was drowning in debt. Loan sharks were after me. They even came to my family's home for repayment. I originally borrowed 150,000 yuan, and my brother managed to pay off over 400,000 yuan of my gambling debt. But because of the compound interest, I still owe around 350,000 yuan. The most terrifying part was when these gang members, armed with my IOUs, came to my office, claiming I had swindled their hard-earned money. The scandal eventually ruined my reputation. I was unable to work or live a normal life, and it put my parents under tremendous strain. You might ask why I didn't report them to the police. Anyone who believes that would be a viable solution must have an IQ below 70. Every gambling den has some powerful backing. The audacity of the rats is always determined by the cats. Therefore, there's no use in lamenting my situation. Rather than being dismissed by my employer, I decided it would sound better if I resigned of my own accord. Without telling my parents, I gave my resignation letter to a good colleague and asked him to submit for me. I then took a high-speed train to Guangzhou and joined a company. The manager, Lin Sheng, had lived in Australia before. He had a sharp mind and was an excellent speaker. My arrival caught his attention, and he looked after me at work, often inviting me for late-night meals and complimenting me on my youth and beauty. Even though I knew these were just preludes to men's deceit, I was rather fond of the attention. Which girl doesn't like to be pampered, after all? A month later, Lynn and I became lovers. Through him, I learned various things about Australia, a beautiful and affluent country 2,400 kilometers away across the Pacific Ocean. He scratched his head, however, explaining that migrating to Australia wasn't easy. An investment migration required at least 5 million Australian dollars, with 2 million invested in Australian equity funds and another 3 million in Australian startups. Studying there would cost at least 600,000 Australian dollars for an undergraduate degree. In 2014, the exchange rate was 5.13 yen for 1 Australian dollar. Smuggling was expensive and risky. I pouted, and Lin hugged me again, reassuring me in his Cantonese accent that there was another way, a work visa. Australia issues 5,000 work visas to mainland China every year, allowing people to work there legally. The visa can be renewed after a year. He mentioned he had friends in the immigration department, which made my heart flutter with excitement. My application was originally for Sydney, but the visa I received was for Melbourne, in the state of Victoria. Chinese workers in Melbourne held a variety of jobs, and if they worked hard for a few years, they could possibly save up to 1 million yuan. Houses in Australia only cost around 300,000 yuan. A popular blogger claimed he had earned 330,000 Australian dollars, equivalent to 1.63 million yuan, after working for 4 years in Australia. Some netizens immediately speculated that the blogger must be working in the sex industry to earn that much money. And thus say, limited perspective and understanding are the root of poverty and ignorance. The blogger wasn't boasting. Not every country's workers earn as pitifully as in India. In developed countries like Europe, America, Japan, and South Korea, it's normal for laborers to save 15,000 RMB a month after living expenses. Whether in Australia, the United States, or Canada, a day's income for a laborer can sustain a week's living. Australia has clear blue skies, and despite being a nature-oriented country, there's not a hint of gloom. The gap between urban and rural areas is not significant, but the air in the countryside, with a less commercial atmosphere, seems fresher and more livable. Walking on a country road with views stretching in all directions, it's clear why this place is called the Garden State. When I first arrived in Australia, I stayed at the house of one of Lin's friends. His name was Yue Yue, a man from Fujian who owned a restaurant in Chinatown. But I didn't stay for free. I paid my rent with my body and worked at his restaurant for 32 Australian dollars an hour. Yue Yue was old enough to be my father and often lacked vigor in bed. I don't know how much satisfaction he got from me, but it ignited a desire in me that had been dormant for 26 years. I don't know if it was innate promiscuity or the temptation of being in a foreign land, but I craved men's touch, even at work in the restaurant. Seeing sturdy male customers would set my mind wandering. Perhaps seeing my needs, one Saturday, Yue Yue brought a friend of his, Edward, to my room. He ambiguously said that Edward found me amazing and wanted to interact more deeply with me. Edward wasn't as robust as most foreigners, even somewhat thin, but it didn't affect his potency. He treated me like a prostitute, pressing me onto the floor, making a series of noises. I scratched and bit him in my wildness, which only spurred his desire to conquer me further. Edward expressed the desire to bring friends next time. The following week, he brought a friend, a robust black man named ID. We drove along Route 32 all the way to Carlton Park, and then our multi-ethnic exchange began in earnest. Both of my openings were explored simultaneously. A year after arriving in Australia, I had yet to save any money, primarily because I love to travel. But in 2015, a family crisis completely changed my views on wealth and taught me a lot about life. My brother was detained by the police for a hit-and-run incident. My mother called to tell me that if we could pay a compensation of 500,000 RMB, the victim's family would agree to a settlement, and my brother would receive a lighter sentence. My mother hoped I could provide 300,000 RMB to save my brother. My brother and I had always been on good terms. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used all our family's savings to help me repay my high-interest loans. I managed to borrow only 14,000 euro. When I asked Yue Yue for help, he coldly stated that our relationship was only physical and related to rent. He didn't owe me any other obligations. My brother eventually received a 6-year prison sentence. Although borrowing money is a favor and not an obligation, I hated Yue Yue for his indifference. I even had someone beat him up severely. I realized that in this indifferent world, you can't rely on anyone but yourself. Why do Chinese people love to save money? Isn't it to withstand life's sudden storms? But how can I earn a lot of money? You can't earn much by just working. Even with high wages in Australia, you can only save around 30,000 Australian dollars a year, which does not match my ambitions. I shared my troubles with Edward, who suggested that I could try becoming a sex worker, stating that a good one could earn up to $280 per hour, or even more. Australia is a country open to sexuality, and in all states, sex work is legal and a part of the service industry. He mentioned that Australia's sex industry is mature and that many Asian students and tour guides take part-time jobs there during their summer vacations. Most importantly, he believed I had a natural talent for the job. Without hesitation, I agreed. In this world where poverty is mocked more than prostitution, people only see the bright side of any kind of success. The first job Edward introduced me to was as a pole dancer in a bar located in central Melbourne. A famous opportunity bar with sexy babes from all around the world. The ground floor was designed for reception, performance, and leisure, while the second and third floors were a workspace. The rooms were all light. As a pole dancer, I wasn't just dancing suggestively around a pole as you might imagine, but I was expected to perform nude dances and even acts of masturbation and intercourse in full view of the public. These didn't bother me much. Isn't a sex worker expected to provide sexual services? My private parts were just tools. As long as the clients paid enough, they had the right to use these tools as they pleased. It was just a routine job. To be honest, I wasn't afraid of serving clients. I have a superb constitution and could handle 10 or 20 clients with ease. I even once served 6 black men at the same time, and although I lost control several times, the next day I was back in top form. What scared me most were the perverts. Their abuse could not only harm physically and mentally, but also threaten life. For instance, I once served a client who enjoyed breath prey games. He nearly choked me to death. Regardless of the money, I ran out and told the boss that I couldn't continue the task. The boss ordered me to go back and finish, but I stubbornly shook my head and was fired that day. After being fired from the bar, I worked as a call girl at a motel. But after providing services to a teenager, I was arrested by the police. The charges were providing commercial sexual services to a minor under 18 and working without a license. It was terrible luck. How was I supposed to know that the visa issued by the Australian government for foreigners working in the sex trade was not recognized in Western Australia? Moreover, foreigners mature earlier, and at a motel, it's like fast food. I couldn't possibly ask every client to show their ID. The motel owner paid a hefty bail to get me out. I worked nonstop for a week to cover the loss. In 2008, I returned to China due to my mother's illness and spent each day with my husband. Everyone has their story. Whether or not we can understand, we should respect others' experiences. We should not impose our perceptions or morals onto others. We should not tell others how to live their life if we haven't walked in their shoes. Everyone has their struggles and hopes for a better life, but those without protection are destined to seek shelter from life's storms. The best path is the one that suits you.